let us follow with the first panel discussion. We invited all the speakers until today who could be with us to join for this half an hour. Thank you, everybody, for the very interesting, provoking presentations and actually reflecting on each other's presentation. And let us start where we left. Jacques, you were saying that the way forward is regionalization, right? We are here representing the V4 countries, chambers of engineers. What do you mean on this last statement? How do you think that regionalization will enhance regional energy policy, if at all? And how, at the end of the day, that will add up to a European energy policy?
That's a good question, Anita. And I must confess that I fear the outcome of that discussion. Because when you start to think about the creation of an internal electricity market in the EU or an internal gas market in the EU, and we have designed, broadly speaking, a fine set of rules for that, and they are commonly applicable all over the EU. We, on that sense, we are more or less world leading. But we didn't want to have 25 liberalized national markets. So we want to have a single liberalized energy market. That means that we have to deal with cross-border flows. That means also that we will have to deal with cross-border investments, that we have to do with facilitating cross-border trade, and so on and so forth. Now, Hungary, probably, people in Hungary probably never will want to buy electricity from Portugal. You're not doing that. So whenever you want to buy electricity across the board, or your industry is doing that, then it is more or less around your region. Now the same applies to a number of other regions, and the Northwest European energy market more or less was leading in that development. But as I tried to explain, one cannot stop, let's say, by taking up only the technical facilities of facilitating cross-border trade and cross-border flows, because you also have to start to think about what are the reasons behind it. What is the investment climate in the region? What is the subsidization regime in the, what is the policy, and so on and so forth. And you cannot figure that out fully by just saying, well, this is something that we will discuss in Brussels. So I believe very strongly that we should focus much more on regionalization, and sometimes I use the expression Schengenizing European energy policy. Well, this is maybe a little bit, okay, this is not the foreign ministry that we're talking to, but anyway. So Schengenizing European energy policy. But then at the end of the day, the conclusion may be that we should reconsider the paradigm of a single market. Now, is this something, personally speaking, that I want? No, I don't want that. So trying to find the balance between regional developments, the V4, you have also this nice Danube energy project. We have the Scandinavian market, which is working together. We have Northwest European market, which is working together. We have the Mediterranean market that is also working together. So when I talk about a EU strategy, that could be done in a common sense. But when it comes to more detailed implementing devices, why not try that to stick to European levels, to regional levels?
Thank you. Let us go through everybody on the variation of different questions. And let me ask Mónika about the Commission's view. How does the Brussels sees the regional cooperation attempts? What's the European Commission's view towards the European unified energy strategy? Do you support that from region-wide? We will add up and aggregate that into European, or your aim is to have a top-down approach and facilitating a EU-wide common energy policy?
First of all, before saying anything, I have to tell you that I cannot say what the Commission thinks. I can say what I think. And whatever I say, it is not the opinion or the view of the Commission. So, well, in terms of EU energy policy or energy strategy, the regions are an important part of it. However, objectives are on an EU-wide, it's more of a top-down approach. However, when we talk about, for example, infrastructure development or challenges in terms of energy market, then obviously regions have a bigger role to play. So that is the top-down or the more of a bottom-up approach. I do see the value of having regions and working on these issues jointly in regions. As the problems are similar, it is much easier to rely on neighbors than obviously relying Hungary on Portugal. So yes, the value of regions does make sense. I would still put the two together. So one is the top-down and the other one is the bottom-up approach.
Thank you. And Frank, what was the impact of the Energiewende on regionalization and on European energy policy?
Actually, I was fearing that kind of question. And now, when I'm going to conferences in Poland or Hungary and other states here, it's when I'm talking about regionalization, it's as Jacques de Jong mentioned, the economic rationale behind this. You have very small markets for big investments, so you need to create bigger markets. And then the investment climate, particularly for companies coming from outside, would be much more attractive. The second reason has to do with security of supply. As we have seen in 2009, we had only few gas interconnectors between the EU member states. So Germany could import additional or alternative gas via a new gas pipeline to Rotterdam. So for the first time we were able to import LNG and to some extent to transport that gas to the Czech Republic and a few others. We were not able, for example, at that time to do that to Poland. We have only recently introduced a small connector in the southern part. So that is helping the security of supply, particularly in crisis situation, to help each other. If you don't have the infrastructure, we are not able to do that. That's one of the major lessons we learned. That's the reason why we're building up these interconnectors also in the north-south direction. In Germany, in terms of the Energiewende, the regionalization has very often a very different understanding. One of the major challenges of regionalization is actually that every federal state in Germany, we do have 16 federal states, is following its own federal Energiewende. And those plans and strategies are not harmonized up to now in Berlin. We have just recognized that problem. I'll give you one practical example. Most of the nuclear power stations we have phased out so far, these are 8 power stations, are located in the southern part of Germany, in particular also in Bavaria. Yeah? Most of the incoming new wind power comes from offshore wind power parks we are building in the Baltic Sea. But therefore, of course, nobody were thinking previously sufficiently about not just the production of renewables, but also connecting the produced energy and bringing it to the consumers. That means by phasing out nuclear power stations in the south, you need to build interconnecting grids from the offshore fields down to Bavaria. But unfortunately, the Bavarian government is saying, we don't want that kind of electricity. We had always followed a path of energy autarky. So that was the reason why we built nuclear power stations in the past. So they're now negotiating, interestingly, with Gazprom, yeah, of building gas power stations. Yeah. So I would love to ask the Prime Minister of Bavaria whether he's more feeling comfortable by becoming dependent on Gazprom or on Niedersachsen. But it's also not really very much helping the Energiewende, nor it's really helping to build up a European single market. So with other words, regionalization has a different kind of meaning very often. So we are not building a greater single market. We actually, there's a certain tendency of rather rebuilding smaller markets, which makes economically no sense at all. But a third reason, which I would mention in this respect, if you build interconnectors, transnational infrastructures between the countries, as I said, it's helping security of supply like we have seen in a gas crisis. But on the other hand, it has a bad side, and this is not being addressed very often. By building these kind of interconnectors, specifically in the electricity sector, if something goes wrong, yeah, if we have, for example, a blackout, as we had it in Germany in 2005, 2006, the more you're becoming interconnected by new transnational infrastructures, the more you increase the cascading transnational boundary effects, which means that kind of blackout will have cascading effects on neighboring countries. In 2005, 2006, we were surprised that these cascading effects from a very small region in the northern west part of Germany in Münsterland had cascading effects on 11 other EU member states, leading to blackouts in 11 other EU member states and even Morocco, affecting 15 million people, although just for a short time. So every coin has two sides. Yeah? The more you build interconnectors, the more you also build into new vulnerability and risks which you need to address. But the second side of the coin are not being given so much attention to that. And there's a huge challenge ahead, particularly by integrating the electricity infrastructures and by build a single market. This is not an argument against it, but just showing that there are also underlying challenges which we do not address sufficiently.
Thank you. Let us follow up on this last point. The interconnectivity, which we already achieved, impacts all of us. So the loop flows, so to say, or the electricity, volatility of the electricity generation in Germany affects the electricity system of all the Visegrad countries. What kind of challenges this integration poses from an engineering point of view? What do you expect? What will be the crucial infrastructure developments in the Visegrad countries to meet the challenges of the 2020 goals, which we set up for ourselves?
So the point is the following. We, Visegrad countries, we started working very well together. József Antal established it. My grandfather was born in Slovakia. So we are all together. But it isn't indifferent whether we build a nuclear power plant or Slovakia does. If we go and negotiate on connecting Sajon-Szent Ivan, we see that we are interconnected in sort of circular circuits. So we have to be really careful who builds what. I am very skeptical about this European cooperation. Think about the following. A person in Bulgaria pays 9 cents for a kilowatt hour, and in Denmark, the same person pays 29 cents. It is the same European Union. A Bulgarian person earns 8 euros in an hour. A Belgian worker, 35 euros. So how can we create a single market of electricity? How can we support in the same manner the renewables? How can someone tell us what to like? I, who have lived through communism, the 40 years of communism, I don't really like it when someone tells me what to do. Excuse me for such a political view. I have 11 grandchildren. Their future is dependent on how cooperation evolves. It's very good that these countries work together. One of the countries is building on coal, we are building on petroleum, and then we switch to gas. And people say it's a problem that we are the leading force in gas, but we are heavily relying on gas, and we are fourth in nuclear energy. There's nothing wrong with that, The point is to try and inform each other about the developments, because we're in a competition. Without competition, we cannot even survive. We cannot rule out competition. Marx wrote in his book on Capital that the best way to destruct power is competition. Marx is not that Marx, but Reinhard Marx, who wrote this book. So we have to be careful that there's competition going on in the region, and we who have a lower salary and we have less than multinational corporations, we need to reap the benefits as well. And we have to rethink the concept of growth.
Thank you. Köszönjük szépen. Alena, as you mentioned, Visegrad is a very good brand name in Brussels. And we have made a lot of progress. Thank you for pointing out the Budapest Declaration 2010 February, which led to the North-South Corridor, which is one of the leading energy infrastructure projects. What's the Slovak position, and how do you see the Visegrad cooperation going forward?
Well, so at this stage, I would like to highlight again that no decision-making process cannot be realized alone. No government cannot decide outside of the environment, outside of the region. So from this point of view, as we are speaking about the security of supply, it's a very important headline, security of supply, we should decide from the down up, from the bottom. That's very important, that individual countries propose the solution within the region, in the context of the region. And region should decide and think within the context of the European Union. And the European Union should think and decide approach within the context from the global point of view. The communication with the third countries, with Russia, with the bigger players is very, very important. So this is security of supply issue. But when we are speaking about the mix, as was mentioned here, and thank you very much for pointing out this idea, this energy mix, and this is in energy policy highlighted many times, and in new energy policy, that it is sovereignty of the state, on the member state, to decide in line with the potential, in line with the level of dependency, in line with the nature context when the country lives. And as it is real that Russia for Slovakia will always be a strategic partner. It is forever. So we should think in line with this fact, etc., etc. So there is two approaches, two principles, from down up and bottom down. That's very, very important, and I would like to thank Commission for taking into consideration in this decision-making process and document creation. So Slovak Republic, as I mentioned in my presentation, is so much dependent country, almost in general, almost in 100%. So nuclear way is a decision for my government, because we don't have any secure way. And for that reason, nuclear energy is our choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's do one more round of discussion on the following question. Is there any ideal energy mix for the Visegrad 4 countries? Or if you would be asked to make a projection, what would be your projection for 2020 or 2050? How would the energy mix of the Visegrad countries change? And the other question is that we focus so much on the infrastructure as bottleneck of integration. Is there any other bottleneck? Is the infrastructure the biggest bottleneck? And I would give the floor optionally to anybody who wants to answer this question.
asked a question about the Visegrad 4 fuel mix, and I dare to give any clue on the Visegrad 4 fuel mix. But more generally speaking, I think that in order to meet the global energy challenge in the longer run, we should not be willing to rule out any option or any technology. And there is no silver bullet, and every option has its pluses and its minuses. And in order to manage the pluses and the minuses in a good way, maybe you could argue that one option is a little bit more suitable for doing that than the other option. Thinking coal, yes, what to do with coal? Do we believe in clean coal? Are we able to manage CCS? I have seen maps that were indicating a new energy Europe. And this region where we are now in was called the CCSR, the CCS Republic. Whereas other regions were called Hydropia or Northern Hydropia or Southern Hydropia or whatever. So is this the future of fuel mixes? I don't know. And if I may make one other comment about national sovereignty and regionalization of approaches and even sub-regional autarchies, like, for instance, you have, or people want to have in Bavaria, and let's face it in that way, that yes, when really it comes to supply security, probably this is the most important element at the end of the day in energy policy making. It's more important than the sustainability issue and then the efficiency issue. It comes really to matter, and this is where the national state steps in. This is one thing, but the other thing is, and I try to put it now a little bit more diplomatically than I usually do, but that is when you are facing a shortfall in your supplies, then you really want to have some kind of mechanism to call for solidarity. Now, the notion of solidarity was also in energy policy introduced in the Treaty of Lisbon. Now, and that is the reason that we are now putting measures and money from the European level to this region in order to secure that gas flows are not only east-west, but could also take west-east. This is solidarity. This is solidarity. But solidarity, of course, has a price. And that would also mean that if you are continuing on that basis with solidarity, then you also want to have some kind of a mechanism or a platform to discuss the reasons why one country is dealing with supply security differently than another country. So solidarity does not stop. Solidarity is a beginning of a further process, and that would also mean that we really want to discuss with each other what the right fuel mix would be in the end. Thank you.
So I have of course, some kind of imagination how a fuel mix could look like. One can speculate that the expansion of renewables will increase differently in the various countries. Coal will be still there, maybe on a reduced share, but it needs to be based on clean coal technologies. It needs to be based on CCS, which is politically speaking, like in Germany, dead. Without having, by the way, an alternative technology available. And we only discuss very often CCS just in regard to coal power plants, but this is totally wrong. Beyond 2025, all kind of gas and oil powered station as well as the entire energy-intensive industry needs to implement CCS. Otherwise, the long-term goal of reducing 80 to 90% of the emissions up to the year 2050 won't be realistic, because CCS will cover around 20% of those kind of reductions, and having no alternative technology available up to now, it's totally open how we can achieve that goal. On the other hand, we still have a tendency, although I have to say we are still on the right track, particularly from the Commission side. Yeah? But as I said, there are huge uncertainties around which have to do with public acceptance and the NIMBYism we have. And this, when you go to Brussels, you often can hear that this kind of German disease is spreading around. And that's a major uncertainty also for investments. I hear CEOs talking meanwhile today that in previous times they thought that the investment climate in Europe as a stable democracy is of course much better than, let's say, in Africa or somewhere. Meanwhile, they are no longer so sure. Yeah, they argue, well, we are experienced to deal with corruption in African companies, and to some extent even with safety and security problems. But we have no real solution to address the public acceptance, the local NIMBYism issue. Yeah? And governments have become very often very populistic. When we introduce the Energiewende, it has been justified on the basis of a national electricity market. So we are just introduced Energiewende in the boundaries of Germany. Yeah? And I was asking myself immediately what they're talking about, because a national electricity market is already no longer given. It's not a reality any longer. Germany was a net exporter of electricity until we phased out. Now it's almost zero. Import and exports are almost zero. So of course the Czech Republic, France and other neighboring countries were asking, particularly the last winter time, how much electricity they can still get from Germany. Yeah? If we have too much electricity produced by renewables, what we do, we're pushing that electricity beyond our borders to the Netherlands and others. Sometimes we have even to pay for that, otherwise we would face an electricity blackout in Germany. The result of that is that power stations in the Netherlands and others need to reduce the electricity power, otherwise they would face electricity. With other words, we're thinking very often still in national boundaries of our electricity system, whereas the energy infrastructures have become increasingly of transnational nature. Yeah? And therefore national energy policies framed in these national boundaries are already out of date for economic, technical, infrastructure reasons. And that's still a challenge to hurrying up the policies according to the technology and infrastructures we have already introduced. And therefore many national decisions on energy policies can no longer be made already, I think, in the national government capitals. So we have to pass some kind of authority increasingly to Brussels, to the Commission. Otherwise, many of those long-term objectives will not become realistic.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mónika?
Well, as a Commission official, and as we agreed already here, I have absolute no say in the energy mix of the Visegrad 4. However, as a person, I still can have some opinion. Well, for the Visegrad 4, and I guess for most of the countries or any regions, one of the key points is diversified. So whatever energy mix, it needs to be diversified. In the second strategic energy review, we also said from a energy security point of view, whatever is produced locally, it is more secure and more available. So that's the other element that needs to be taken into account. So whatever is available locally, it's best. And finally, my third point is that probably the cheapest and the best energy source is the one that we don't have to even produce. So energy efficiency is also a must, and I think in this region there is a lot of potential in achieving that.
Thank you. The very last round of questions, as already the lunch is almost served, I would like to ask all of you just to give us one date. And the question is, will there ever be, and if yes, when, an integrated European energy market? The way we would define an integrated energy market. Just one date.
Can I start? For me, it's easy. So
We know.
I have to say 2014.
Okay.
Can I add yes, on paper?
It will be a little bit later, but I'm still optimistic. It will be before 2020.
I would like to caution the Commission to elaborate optimums until 2050. We have had several attempts where we went to Holland, and it wasn't even 20 years ago that we were watching the Guggenheim procedure, 1/3 coal, 1/3 nuclear energy, 1/3 coal. And then it was very expensive, so they stopped this. Then we went to Preußen Elektra, where we were told that the future is based on nuclear energy and an interconnected single current. Then Mr. Kramer, who told us about this, was also kicked out. So we would like to learn about the optimum mix, but I would like to say it is very important to have an integrated, multidimensional engineering way of thinking or perspective.
Alena, do you have a date?
De jure or de facto, de jure maybe very soon, but de facto I think that it will be about around 2017.
Thank you. I would like to thank very much for all the panelists for accepting the invitation of the Chamber of Engineers flying in from long distances, and invite the audience for the lunch. Thank you.